Welcome to October, everybody. The Broken Brains charity of focus this month is Mental Health Awareness Creative Arts Gallery in Hudson, New York. This is a wonderful organization. You can hear the episode where I interviewed Brian Belt, the co-founder of this group, and you can go to stigmafree.art to learn more about their wonderful programs. They offer free art classes for the community, and through different kinds of art training and art showcasing, art galleries, and outlet for those with mental health diagnoses and addiction who are using art as a healing process. They're also helping out with some of the court-assisted jail diversion programs like drug court and becoming a bigger presence in that area. So go to stigmafree.art to learn more about how art is being used to help with mental health and addiction. If you do decide to become a paid patron of The Broken Brain, go to patreon.com/brokenbrain. As always, the half of your donation will go towards the charity that was highlighted in the month that you join. So if you join this month in October, half of your donation will go to Mental Health Awareness Creative Arts Gallery for the perpetuity, as long as you are a member of our Patreon. Or you can go directly there and get involved with a very worthy organization that does lots and lots of good at stigmafree.art. The Broken Brain.
Recording in progress.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to The Broken Brain. Really glad to have everyone here with us today. And by us, I mean me, your host, Dwight. Hi, here again to talk with you about psychology, culture, and the intersection of all those things. And the other half of us, there we go, because there's two. That's the way math works. Julie, I'm not trying to show off. Just that I understand math problems up to and including 2.
It's impressive.
I'm grateful to be joined today by Julia Baird, who is a journalist, a broadcaster, and author. She's author of the book Phosphorescence, as well as Media Tarts, which is a biography of Queen Victoria. I didn't know that one until I just saw this.
Yes. No, the Media Tarts is about female politicians and the way they're represented. And the biography of Queen Victoria is called Victoria the Queen. I would not dare to call Queen Victoria a media tart.
I did think that was kind of daring, but
kind of racy.
See, that makes more sense. I wrote them down in wrong order on the thing.
Good.
Thank goodness it wasn't. That'd be embarrassing if it was the one I read before this. But we are actually here talking about the one I do know the name of for sure's, which is Bright Shining, how Grace Changes Everything, which is a really wonderful read. And I'm excited for you to be able to share some of the principles of this with people. So Julia, welcome.
Oh, I'm delighted to be here. Great to see you.
If you would start out, could you tell everybody a little bit more about you, about who you are and how you came into writing in this space and creating and what led you to write this book?
Yeah. So I'm a journalist, a reporter. I spent a few years living in the States, actually, where I was working at Newsweek and writing on a bunch of different things. My background is in history. I've done a lot of work in history and I've written about women in history and so on. But I came to start writing about awe and wonder, partly because it was something I'd always thought about. And living in Sydney, Australia now, I live right on the beach, near the beach, and near this little protected marine park where you can see all manner of incredible things, turtles and baby sharks and big stingrays and cuttlefish, and I swim over it almost every day. And writing about that, I had to write a piece about it one time, and I had to try to think about why it was having such an impact on me. What was it doing to me? And anyway, that led me down the path of awe and a real interest in awe and how these things can get us by very difficult times. And then I came to writing about grace, which is in itself a form of awe. And through all of this, I've had difficult times of my own. Like a lot of people, I've gone through breakups. I've had several bouts of cancer now. And I really have found that holding on to these things has given me a strength that I didn't anticipate, and which has actually been really great. Yeah.
It's a great question. These questions that you're asking in the book too, all about mainly. I mean, grace is obviously one on the title, but yeah, that awe and that sense of beauty. And the question I think a lot of people don't stop is to stop and ask, like, not only what is that, but where does it come from and why do we feel it? And it opens up, as a therapist, you know, I questions are just as powerful as answers oftentimes, right? That's something that we face. And it's interesting how you talk about applying that. And I'm interested to hear that how that intersects with some of the life experiences. And I will say, my experience has been that when somebody says several, you know, we use the word several to describe cancer. That means you've been through some experiences. Then at that point,
I
you don't
really
say I
have.
survived it once or twice, but that's a lot.
4 times.
And that can definitely leave people not feeling a sense of awe and grace if they focus on that I would think. So
it's strange how suffering can sometimes lead you there. Also, a sense of your own mortality. What is it about? Well, you know, fundamentally, why are we here? And I think when I was writing about awe, I kept thinking, what is that? Why do I feel that way? When I go out and you're sitting wherever you are, and there's a vast canopy of stars above you, you know how you feel? You feel comforted and soothed and small in a good way. Like, I kept going, what is that? Like, what is that emotion? Or you're walking through a forest and the trees above you. And like, to me, it was that sense of curiosity, as you say, that asking those questions. And when I landed on awe, that made so much sense to me. And built into that is a whole bunch of things: a stopping, paying attention to the world, kind of marveling at it. Also a sense of your own smallness, which I think often we underestimate how important psychologically feeling small is to us. Astronauts talk about the overview effect, you know, and how they go up into space and they are like philosophers and so they go up into space, and they're scientists and they're engineers, they're mathematicians, and they come back and they're philosophers and theologians and philanthropists and poets. And a lot of that is like the earth disappearing behind their thumb, that sense that national boundaries don't matter. We have to, all we have really is each other, and to realize how fragile the planet is. So I think that's what being small can do. And a lot of the studies of awe show that people are more likely to be altruistic, feel connected to each other, feel like inhabitants of the earth. So, I think all those things are really important.
You outlined some really interesting studies and things in there. One of the things that encapsulates what I took from the book is it's fairly early on. You tell the story of sitting in a meeting and people talking about things they'd seen that were beautiful. And to me, the spirit of this story carried throughout the whole thing, but it hooked me right away. There was a man, and if I remember this part right, I think it might have even been homeless.
Yes,
because I think you were working with the Salvation Army, or at least you were observing.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And he said what his beautiful sight was, and I'll let you say what it was, but it just really hit me of this concept right away of what you're saying, which is, what do we see when we look around, right?
That's right. So, we're all sitting around in a circle and everyone had to answer a question, and his was, he picked out, what's the most beautiful thing you've seen recently? And he said, so people, I'm really into nature, and like people that know me know that I have problems with mental health. And I'm in and out of this hospital where they look after me sometimes. And in the end of this hospital, there's a patch of concrete near the room where we all meet together. And when it rains, the sound of the rain on that is like a waterfall. And he said, it's really beautiful. And I said to him, well, that must be a very soothing thing. And he said, yeah, it really is. And people that know me know I'm really into nature, and I'm really into waterfalls. And that to me is a beautiful place. And I was really blown away by that. Oh. And actually, not long ago, another friend of mine was in there for getting some treatment for mental health, and it was raining. And we went down to the end of the common room and found the patch of concrete and sat there and listened to it and thought about how much.
Actual place. Oh.
And I think sometimes the seemingly smallest of things can give us beauty or joy. There's a really fantastic book, The Sound of a Wild Snail Eating, about a woman who was very ill, confined to her bed for a couple of years, and someone gave her a plant and didn't realize there was a snail on it. And unable to move, she observed this snail over a couple of years and how the chewing of leaves at night, discovering it had like hundreds and hundreds of teeth and like laying of babies, and how the act of paying like really close attention to this one creature and kind of wondering about it all the time had kept her going in a way that she hadn't anticipated.
There's a lot of stuff going on around us that we wouldn't necessarily label in that way. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people come and go past that patch of concrete, especially considering this is a hospital and where there's emergency services or where there is people with mental health concerns or loved ones of those that are there for those treatments. I imagine a lot of people walk past there and don't stop and go, oh, the beauty of nature. It's probably right around here somewhere.
Yeah,
because we get into our own little, we get into a space of things that are, I mean, in many cases actually are very important, but they're so important that we don't stop and notice other stuff that might actually be more important, but in a different way. Is that a good way to say it?
Yeah, I totally agree. A lot of this is about being, especially with awe, is about being open to it. We think that I do like to hunt awe very deliberately and build it into my life. And writing and thinking about and pursuing grace is a big part of that. But people think you have to, go to the Grand Canyon or go paragliding or go and swim with whales, all of which are fantastic things to do. But actually, you can experience that sense of being out of yourself and observing something really closely in your back garden or in a hospital room. Yeah. It's actually around you if you change the lens with which you're looking at things.
How would we define that for people? What's your sort of working definition of grace? If it's something that helps us, what are we looking for?
It's, to me, I think fundamentally in grace is something that is undeserved. It's beyond the tit for tat. There's a lot of they've done something bad, they should therefore be X, Y, Z. I think it is the possibility that we can love the unlovable, sometimes even forgive the unforgivable, although there's limits to that I write about as well, that we show mercy, not merit. We give people the benefit of the doubt. We don't define them by the worst things that they have done. We acknowledge that the basic humanity of people around them, and we don't stop and assess if they're like us, if they vote the same way or think the same way or dress or look or their kids go to the same schools, whatever it is your metric of a person like you is, we are able to look beyond that. And what took me from awe to grace was this study of by Dr. Keltner from the University of California, Berkeley, and he was asked a whole bunch of people, almost 3,000 people across 26 different countries, and said, what was your most common experience of awe? And you'd think nature, right? But he said it was seeing acts of great beauty in each other. So decency, generosity, courage, and overcoming of hurdles and problems in life. I'm seeing a lot of it in the Paralympics now. The stories of some of these Paralympians are just so awe-inspiring because of what they've overcome and the grit and the courage and the determination is so incredible. I mean, Australia right now is celebrating Alexa Leary, who had a terrible accident 2 years ago, lost the top of her skull. Her parents had to say to her 8 times they farewelled her. Now she's winning gold at the Paralympians, and it's kind of amazing. So, but I think we talk a lot about compassion and kindness and all those really, really important qualities, empathy. To me, grace is closely tied to the idea of honor as well, which I think is the way a lot of men think about this stuff. But I think it's often doing something that is undeserved that can be the most shocking and that can allow the possibility for redemption or a new way of being.
I really like the way that you apply it to certain aspects of societal needs and advocacy, even the concept that when people are, because one of the things I think is very important to that definition is that it's not just sitting back and saying like, oh, well, that's bad, I'll forgive it in the sense that I just won't do anything about it. In fact, I was very impressed. When you talk about your daughter and her, motivation for making change and things like that.
Mm,
But one of the things I really liked is you pointed out to disenfranchised communities who are reaching out with any type of advocacy that works within the system that they are within, as that is a sign of grace. That's a show of grace by those
yes,
individuals to say,
right.
and it's interesting because I've thought this before especially when I hear people complain about advocacy. That this is a big pet peeve of mine, by the way. People who complain about advocacy that they don't approve of when it's a group that they don't even belong to, and they're like, "Oh, I
Yes,
don't like that. It wasn't very polite, or I didn't really. That made me feel funny, just because
right.
someone said they didn't like being treated this way institutionally. It kind of bothered me for 10 minutes. Then that shouldn't have happened.
Yeah,
Anyway, but that idea that that's an act of grace to even communicate, even take that to
yes.
communicate. Hey, here's these egregious wrongs, and we're going to civilly do something, or we're going to do something to whatever degree that there is even attempt to work with the culture and advocacy that is grace. And I hadn't thought about it that way. That's very interesting.
Oh, I'm so glad that you picked up on that. Thank you. That's such a good point. Um, Look, I mean, I think often people assume that a grace is firstly easy, secondly just moving on and just forgetting the past. And I met with people, comfort women who are organising the archives and the memories of the comfort women who were used as largely Korean, Japanese, even a couple of Australian women that were used as slaves, sexual slaves during the Second World War, and spoke to them about, is there anything about forgiveness that can occur like collectively? And they really were speaking to me about the idea that you have to tell this history truthfully and honestly and reconcile with it before you even approach those things. But what really struck me most of all was when I spent quite a bit of time with the stolen generations, members of the stolen generations in Australia. And I know this has also been the case in Canada and in parts of America as well. So the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in Australia who were taken from their families as children and sent to institutions or orphanages, often trained to do domestic work, or taught to be white, their mouths like soaked out, or chemicals if they ever spoke their own native language. Like really, they were taken away from family, culture, community, any sense of, and often abused in those at the same time. So this terrible generational trauma that's been passed on, and it really was happening, as recently as early as the 1970s. So it's scars that very much endure and that haven't really been thoroughly recognised by this country, especially how the enduring impacts of it. So to spend time with those men and women and talk to them about it, to me, was particularly pertinent because we'd had a prime minister not long ago on something called National Sorry Day, which is held to mark, nationally we're saying sorry that happened. He said, okay, it's one thing to say sorry, and obviously we've done that, but now the harder thing is for you to forgive. And there was a lot of pushback to that idea, the sense that it was now their burden to forgive, when really not enough had been done to acknowledge, and so one of the elders
even named the day sorry.
Yeah, exactly. What more can we do?
Exactly.
And one of the elders on Twitter said, get in the bin. And I was like, well, that prime minister was assuming that grace here is going, okay, let's all go on in harmony now. But when I spent time with one woman, Arnie Lorraine Peters, who herself had a terrible experience and was taken away when she was a little girl and had to go back to that place. It's called the Cootamundra Girls' Home. I watched her leading workshops where she was teaching people about what it was like to have been taken away and what that means when you're 10, but then all that means when you're 50 and 70 and 80. How does this endure? And I watched her caring for her own mob, and I watched her working with white people, and I watched her strength and her ongoing desire to communicate after everything that happened to her. After, I had one pastor, an Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander pastor, say to me, you can't forgive when there's an open wound. So when I was looking for grace in that situation and I saw it, and she said to me, I have no idea about the word forgiveness. I don't even know what that means. And she said, it's not my shit, it's your shit, is what she actually said. Yeah. I've already dealt with what you've done to me. Why do I now have to deal with that? And
but then such a vague concept sometimes, particularly when it is prescribed by someone saying you now need to forgive. Anyone telling anyone else to forgive, I think that's the biggest problem. Is it's such a vague concept, and it's just another way of shifting responsibility onto usually a victim of something. Yeah.
That's exactly. And whereas I saw grace in the way she was working with people and continuing to work and continuing to hope and moving towards a better future. And I was really quite blown away by that. But it's exactly right. Like, one thing I've really tried to do in the book is speak about the times in which forgiveness can be weaponized. Look, it should never be separate to justice, right? It should never be separate to consequences. But there have been certain communities and certain times, and even like just broadly, we're expected to really quickly forgive people for sexual assault, for domestic abuse. And this creates a culture of impunity where people can assume that they'll get away with this because they may well escape any legal consequences, and then they can just very quickly ask for forgiveness. So I think we need to think about forgiveness in a different way there, and what it might mean for a person to break free from bad things someone has done to them.
I really appreciate that concept because as I work with people, I work with a lot of people who are survivors of various kinds of trauma, including abuse, right?
Right.
And when people have been physically or sexually abused or both, or just had traumatic events, they hear this a lot where it's like, well, you need to forgive and move on, forgive and move on, forgive and move on. Sometimes even by those that spent a lot of their time protecting the perpetrator, sometimes even by the perpetrator, if it's a parent or something, over time. But then that's reinforced sometimes by culture, community, church, even well-intentioned people who have been also suckered into this thought that that's what forgiveness means. You just, you are fine and you move on and everything. Now for me, this is more of a psychological way to reframe type of definition, but this is one of the things I liked about the way you're talking about forgiveness, because to me, forgiveness isn't saying it's okay that happened to me. And it's not even saying that I'm not angry about it anymore.
Right.
I think that effectively the act of forgiveness is trying to do things purposefully so that the anger and the hurt, the effects of the trauma aren't the reasons why I'm doing anything. They're still there, and I respect them, and I respect the anger, and I might even need the anger to energize me to do something, but I'm making decisions purposefully. I'm not allowing that to drive the decisions that I make for me and for what I'm going to choose to do. It's basically more of I look at it as more of a clarity of why I'm doing what I'm doing. And then there's you're talking, I think, a little more in a spiritual component as well. A soulful component is added to that. But anyway, that's a definition
I understand that.
From a practical sense for a lot of people.
Some people speak about it as an unburdening. So really the benefit is for you primarily. But let me tell you an example of someone who really had a big impact on me when I met and interviewed her. So I spend time with people who do restorative justice. So you'd be aware of the practice, but basically the idea of it, you bring together the person that caused the harm with the person the harm's been caused to. Sometimes there's elders or families around them, but often that person, and then a mediator, a convener who will have spent a year probably at least getting to the point where they can get together and talk, because this is driven by the victims. This has to make the victims feel okay, because often, as we know, victims go through a whole legal situation and they can feel worse at the end of it. They haven't been able to say what happened to them. So there was one woman I met, so Debbie McGrath was her name, and her brother was murdered when she was 24, he was 20, by one of his friends. And no reason has ever been given for it. And she was heavily pregnant, absolutely furious. This guy went to jail, but she found herself consumed with the hate and desire for vengeance towards this guy and everything he'd taken from the family. She began sleepwalking. She got diabetic. She had all kinds of health issues. The same thing with her father. It just the ripples out. She said to me that she would be looking at the sunset and thinking of ways to murder him. Like, it was so deep in her. And eventually she sat 10 years after it happened. She sat down with him in one of these restorative justice sessions. And she said to him, "This is what you did to me, my health, my sanity, physical, mental. This is what you did to my father," and detailed it all. "This is what you did to my brother's son who grew up without a dad." And she said there was a point during that conversation where she felt that she sat up and looked around, like, unconsciously, because she felt like something was lifted from her. And she realized that during that session, she had, like, taken what he did to her and the family in a suitcase and left it with him. What he did was with him, and she was freed. And she still marvels to this day at the impact that hour has had on the rest of her life. She said, "I don't know if you call that forgiveness, but I left that with him." You know, it's a whole different form of thing. And what she was most frightened about is that she wouldn't be able to love anymore. For her, love was now associated with loss. And she'd struggled to love her grandkids. And when I last spoke to her, she's like, "I so love my grandchildren," and absolutely delighting in that. And I think that's kind of incredible.
Wow.
Yeah.
I've been able to be on the inside of a couple of those types of things, mostly when it was siblings who there was some kind of abuse at a younger age and things, and they were rebuilding a relationship. But I've never witnessed firsthand someone going through that with a secondary victim, I guess, or whatever you want to call it, of a murder and the murderer of a loved one.
Yeah.
You know, that's it's got to be a very intimidating process to go into, but it sounds like very transformative too.
Yeah,
there's a real
very
courage with
transformative.
that. I mean, that's
Yes.
think about that takes a lot of willingness to really confront something inside ourselves, just as much as the person themselves who we have to look at and talk to. That's amazing.
And that person too has to show some remorse.
Sure. Yeah.
That's a precondition.
That would be
because imagine bringing them in and they're going, "Meh, I don't care." Like, that would be terrible.
Yeah, I would think
the aim is not for further harm here.
That would be it.
Yeah, that's right. Has to be careful with that. But I mean, Sorry, it underlined for me when I think about grace. I think a lot of people think of it as a soft and gentle word about Kleenex and puppies, but repeatedly I found how tough it is and how much grit it requires and how often you have to decide again and again that that's how you want to be. You don't just forgive in a single instant. You might say you do, but you'll have to wake up and do it again and again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you talk about how people look at things, you mentioned the astronaut thing. It reminded me of a post I'd seen from an astronaut, actually, who had shared very much the same what you said. He'd been on a spacewalk and he looked down. I don't recall his name, but anyway, he said he looked down and he saw the lights turning on as the nighttime was falling, and he was impressed with all of these, like, that there's so many of us and all of our problems. If we would just band together, there's so many of us, we can probably think of lots of clever things, and very beautiful thought. Now, I saw it on social media, and here's the thing. I went ahead and just read down into the comments, which you should always do. That's what I've been told. Always read all the comments. And it was so interesting how almost immediately some people decided it was a good idea to start really, really going after each other. And next thing I knew, there was all these arguments that splintered off that had nothing to do with the post. All of a sudden people were just sniping at each other. And then you had a few others that just were like, "Oh, that's cute. That was really good thought. Thanks. Wow, this is inspiring." And so it's the very same thing. And it's the very same world that we're in, right? And I love this concept you said of awe hunting, right? That you're looking for those things. And I wonder, your book obviously works on this, but what would you say to people about the lens they're looking through of how can they find, because we can obviously find reasons to experience grace or the opposite in the same situations. What do you think it takes for people to start seeing that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I think we hunger for it in ways we don't anticipate sorry. I think there's a real yearning for things that unite us. Even when I recently went in a massive choir that had 2,000 people, and it's this thing called pub choir, and she just teaches 3 parts of harmony. By the end of the night, you've got a song going. I'm sure there's other similar things. There's the very ability to stand with a group of strangers and sing in harmony and create something beautiful when we are so used to division. We live in the comment section, right? That we'll say something and someone immediately will go, well, hey, but you're a white guy. Hey, you're an Australian fool. You're a whatever we are. We, get kind of diminished or cast or put aside, as opposed to like always something that we all share. There will be a very few people that might, I don't know, hate sunsets, think that, whales suck, or like mountains are boring. But there's not a lot. And it is something that we really share. I think it is about really training your mind to think about it and really pursuing it. Talk to people around you. Like, where do they find their awe? And you get to know a completely different side of someone. And it's fantastic sharing awe with people. And it takes so many different forms. It can be cathedrals and architecture and art and music and massive sporting events. It can be so many things. A lot of scientists measure it by goosebumps. To me, grace is also looking for that. So when I was writing my last book and I had a surgery in the middle of my last book, it meant I was sitting in hospital and I was looking around me all the time for the ways in which people cared for each other. And to me, there's something so profound about a hospital where people come in and you don't know who they are, and they could be complete jerks, or they could bore you to tears. There could be just things about them that completely offend you. But these staff, the paramedics, the doctors, surgeons, nurses, will care for them, will tend to them, will bind their wounds, will make them better, because it's a human who needs it. And I also find the same thing with blood donors. The community of people who donate their blood, literally the very core of themselves.
That was so interesting to read about that,
right?
in when you were talking about that in the book, and just the concept of why do people even do it? There's not really an easy
benefit
answer to that. Yeah.
No, they get a milkshake sometimes afterwards. In Australia, they get cookies.
The first time I ever did it, I thought I was going to die for about 5 seconds. I don't know why. I was just like, this is fine. And then I went like super woozy. And then 5 seconds later, I was okay. And I was like, that was weird.
Yeah, right.
Sorry, that's neither. I'm not trying to dissuade anyone. It was fine. It was great. I just didn't eat enough before I did. But
low blood pressure.
Yeah, anyway, but you were just saying there's no like internal, intrinsic, immediate reward for the person. It's not like I'm going to get this blood back if I get hurt.
No, but they're giving so that someone can, walk or live a little longer, or have a life they might not otherwise be used to having. And I've had blood transfusions, and it is a pretty wild thought to have someone else's blood come into you. And yet I've felt stronger after that. And again, we don't know who that person is. They could be someone who goes onto Twitter and just yells at people all the time, or it could be someone who, I don't know, is kind of just a massive grouch. But someone the other day was saying
names here. No, just kidding.
Yeah, I'll post it afterwards. Someone said recently, I suppose grace is compassion, and it's like, it is, but it's an astonishing kind of compassion. So think of the person down the road, a neighbour who you know reasonably well. You discover they're really sick. You bring them casseroles. You organise food. That's compassion. If that neighbour down the road is someone who's been a real jerk for years and years, offended everyone around him, you still do that, that's grace.
Yes. Okay. It's kind of like broadening our view. And that's another thing I really like about it, is that it's not just you're not just advocating for like think positive, which I find to be sometimes dismissive and shallow. You're talking about broadening to say, I'm in this hospital, look at these horrible things, and then broadening the view. It's almost like panning out just a little bit more to include the great acts of response to these horrible things that are happening.
Yeah.
It's like
exactly. Yeah. Even in families clustered around those beds, and there's often moments of laughter, and there's often moments of connection. There can be really incredible moments. of people looking after each other. Yeah, and it's horrible. It's awful. There's people around you in pain and suffering all the time, and yet in the middle of it.
Yeah.
I was listening to an interview with Nick Cave this morning, the Australian singer-songwriter. I think we can still claim him as one of ours, even though he's lived in England for a long time. And he was saying that joy is a form of suffering because it's different to happiness. Because in a way, joy recognizes that all this pain and all these horrible things can exist, but even so in the midst of that, and at the same time of that, or before or after, you can go above it and you can see things of beauty. Yeah. And those are the things that I think will sustain you.
It's a great opportunity for people to look at this and where is our attention lying. Yes. So I'm really grateful to be able to talk to you about this. Is a great moment of awe and grace of you to come and talk, and awe for me to get to meet you and hear the way that you put this together. And one of the best things from a selfish perspective when I get to do these kinds of interviews is I get to read the book. And so I hope everybody else who's listening will do that as well. I do want to let everybody know the best places that they can get your book for you. I have a quick question that I always like to ask people, and I just realized that I forgot to warn you. I always try to warn people about this question.
Okay.
I think you'll be okay.
Let me go in this just
That's right.
Raw. Yes.
So I always like to ask guests if they have a favorite way of giving back to the community that they would recommend for other people. And it could just be a good, nice thing to do, like you've been talking about several nice things people do.
Yes.
Or it could be a favorite charity or nonprofit or just something that you'd like to give a little shout out to. Does anything come to mind for you?
Well, I mean, I would say blood donation is a really important thing that people could think about. It is just, there's often a shortage, and it's not just life-changing, it gives people life.
Yes.
And there's so many people who trot along week after week as faithful acts of service or community. And at the moment, I think I would really like to shout out to Médecins Sans Frontières, because the work they do in war zones, is incredible, and they need all the resources that they can get. Wonderful. The thought of the number of children that have been suffering, particularly in recent months, can be overwhelming. So, again, to continue the idea of doctors who just go in to bind up wounds without saying whose side are you on, I think is powerful and should be supported in every way.
That's awesome. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Well, tell everybody where the book is. Bright Shining, How Grace Changes Everything. And where's the best place for people to get that? Is there any place that is, I don't know, to your liking more than another for them to buy it?
Yeah, that's true. Well, thank you for asking that question. First of all, I would say if you have a local bookstore, support your local bookstore, because they are the true, pharmacists of so many things that ail us, I think, booksellers. But online, I would go to Barnes & Noble. It's published by Harper One. So I think you can also get it from them, or any place that sells books, really.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
And where do people follow your work? Do you have a central location, social media-wise, website-wise? Do your home address?
Yeah,
you want them to show up?
I'm on Facebook and Instagram at Julia Baird. I've got an authory page, which is the same. So I think if you dip into those, you'll have a really good chance.
All right. Well, thank you. And thank you so much for being here to share this with everybody. And just a quick plug to everybody else. Make sure each month we highlight a charity here on The Broken Brain. You can hear that. I'm sure you did hear that up at the top of the episode when it started. I said which one it was. I don't know. I don't always remember which month these are coming out as we record them. So therefore, you already heard which one it was. And if you can go directly to the website that was plugged earlier, or you can also, if anybody joins the Broken Brain patrons to support the program, you get the bonus materials, but also 50% of your donation that you make to the program each month will go to the charity that was highlighted in the month that you joined. So if you join it this month, you will be donating 50% of your Patreon donation, not just to help the show run here, but but half of it goes to help that charity as well, as long as you remain a member. So that's just a little fun thing we've been doing. Julia, best of luck with the book, and so excited to talk to you. Thank you so much.
I really loved talking to you, and I love how well you understood the book. I appreciate that so much. Thank you, Dwight.
Thank you for listening to the Court Arts Podcast Network. To listen to more Court Arts shows, visit courtemparts.com.